in America. Hand in hand in America. Together as one in a land that we love. United we stand in America.
Good morning, everyone. This is Changing Times, and I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Mary Byrne. Lynn Morris is listening today. He'll be back next week when we have one of our sponsors, Brad Pistow, with us. But until then, my guest is Tracy Dugan. She's the director of the Missouri Concerned Women for America. I'm excited to have a discussion with you about how you got involved with Concerned Women for America. But first, what I want to do is to thank our sponsors, Brad Pistow from Trinity Insurance and Financial Services. Brad will be with us next week to tell you more about his services and how he and his business are actually part of his faith walk, and how he offers services to people to provide for them financial security for their future. If you're interested in talking to Brad now rather than waiting until next week, please call him at 417-581-9222. I also want to thank our sponsors, Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia. They have been faithfully supporting Changing Times and Lynn Morris. Their number is 417-882-3838. And Lynn will have them on within the next couple of weeks to share with you what faithful service they provide to their customers. Lynn has been a customer of them for a number of cars. He prefers used cars, and frankly, I understand that. Kind of gets all the bugs out of the system, and you get good warranties and good service from Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia. Again, their number is 417-882-3838. If you are interested in any of the services provided by Brad Pistow or Springfield Nissan and Springfield Kia, their information is going to be running across the bottom of the screen so you can catch it throughout the show. And we appreciate you supporting our sponsors. Now, though, I'm excited to share with you a friendship I have with Tracy Dugan. We've known each other for several years through Concerned Women for America. I describe myself as a floater. I know people throughout Missouri, basically because like-minded people gravitate together up in Jefferson City. We have to. We have to share information and be a prominent, you might say, face and force with legislators up there, so that they know that the values that we have as believers in Jesus and followers of his teachings are being infringed upon, they're being infringed upon in a big way, not only by lobbyists who are promoting legislation up there, but by bureaucrats who are in charge of the departments. And we need to inform them, enlighten them, give them evidence of what they need to address up there in order to represent us and our needs, as well as the needs of, you might say, a moneyed elite that is trying to take over our culture and our society. So, Tracy.
Yes.
I'm going to introduce you with some information that is available about you on the website, because I figured you wrote it.
I did.
And it would be a good summary. Tracy's a graduate of Southern Nazarene University, holding a Bachelor of Science degree in history.
Mm-hmm.
I just have a kind of a avocation in history, but you chose it as a vocation early on. She worked as a paralegal for the past 25 years, assisting in civil trial practice in the state of Missouri. That must be interesting work.
It is. It can be.
Yeah, and so you see a lot of the effects of law on people through your office. Tracy's been active in her local church as a teacher, a pianist, and a choir director, and has served on the church and missionary boards. You're the director of Concerned Women for America, Missouri, and you live in Springfield.
I do. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure to have you. I appreciate what average citizens do to make a difference in our culture, and this show is about difference makers. What I find encouraging is that there are organizations available that people who may not have degrees in political science, may not have been interested in politics before, but know something's wrong and know it's coming from the government. They need information about where they can plug in, immediately offer their energy, time, talent, and treasure, and get that support and information they need to be effective in protecting their families and homes. And that's what Concerned Women is all about, Concerned Women for America. So I want to start first with a little bit of background about CWA so that our audience knows that it was Beverly LaHaye. Yes, she was married to a famous pastor, but she went out on her own to confront a major cultural force, which was the National Women's Organization.
Yes.
So she understood. I'm going to read to you a little blurb that I found about Beverly LaHaye so that you understand what we're dealing with 50 years after Beverly started Concerned Women for America is ongoing, probably, I would say, amplified and multiplied in its intensity, because as Christians become more aware, and not just aware, it's not about knowledge, more aware and more active, acting on that knowledge, that I don't want to just call it the left, because the left are actually working out of a Marxist agenda, which is an anti-God agenda, to eliminate God, pretend that the government can provide more security and more actual future for people. Because it's tangible, it's materialistic, it doesn't rely on an unseen, the faith in the unseen, when actually, if you think about it, everything Marx promised is still unseen, right? It takes faith to believe in Marxism. Nonetheless, that's what happened. Beverly LaHaye, founder of Concerned Women for America and former president and chairman of the board, was married to Tim LaHaye, an evangelical Baptist minister. In 1979, so I was still a young thing then. I know you were even younger.
I was.
She founded Concerned Women for America to protect and promote biblical values for women and families. Mrs. LaHaye had seen Barbara Walters. Now, for those of you who aren't as seasoned as I am, okay, you might have seen Barbara Walters on The View, right? Until she finally left that show. So she still had some contemporary visibility. But Barbara Walters was considered groundbreaking as a newswoman on the air. She broke that glass ceiling, right, on national news. Barbara Walters was interviewing Betty Friedan, who is considered the mother of the women's movement, the second wave of the feminist movement. She wrote the book, The Feminine Mystique, and described herself as just an average housewife and mother who was trapped inside the home, unable to use her intellectual prowess because she was making peanut butter sandwiches and changing diapers. Okay, so she wrote this book, Feminine Mystique, and like I said, promoted herself as basically enslaved in the home. When Mrs. LaHaye was convicted that she had to speak on behalf of millions of women who didn't feel that way about being the feminine figure in a father and mother led family relationship inside a home. It turned out Mrs. LaHaye established the organization in California. It spread like wildfire throughout the nation. She got quite the following and ended up testifying in Congress on multiple occasions about, guess what? Abortion policies. Policies that affected family income and what was happening there. So in a nutshell, LaHaye founded this organization to take on Betty Friedan and the National Organization of Women. So it's incredible to me what a single individual with a conviction and being appointed by God undertakes. Now, yeah, she had the network through her husband, but she was animated by that spirit of service and understood what was happening at a national level that would filter down all the way to the local home. So here's what I found interesting. She wrote the book, Feminine Mystique, and a college professor named Daniel Horowitz, who was a leftist, actually outed Betty Friedan, not as the average housewife she portrayed herself to be, but as a political activist who was a committed Marxist, a follower of Stalin, and a propagandist for the communist left for a quarter of a century. So what you saw in her downgrading of mothers in the home was actually part of, if you read the Communist Manifesto, abolition of the family. Mm-hmm. And when you read the manifesto, you see that the whole idea of sexual freedom was part of Marx's idea of destroying the family. And he believed that this whole business of women being married was an institution of enslavement. That's a Marxist idea. I was, again, a young thing in the 70s when this is being promoted. But I remember the spouse swapping going on, the huge increase in the divorce rate, because Betty Friedan's book had such an impact on women and particularly university students. So according to David Horowitz, no relation to Daniel, Friedman's interest in women's liberation was a subtext of her real desire to create a Soviet America. That she was acting basically as an informal agent for undermining our culture, our society. Daniel Horowitz documents that Friedan was, from her college days until her mid-30s, a Stalinist Marxist, the political intimate of leaders of the America's Cold War fifth column, and for a time even the lover of a young communist physicist working on the atomic bomb in Berkeley's radiation lab with Robert Oppenheimer. That's hardly the average housewife.
Not at all.
All right? So her description of that suburban family household as a comfortable concentration camp was actually a mask for her Marxist hatred for America. And at the same time that Beverly LaHaye is working on this, so is Phyllis Schlafly. Mm-hmm. They're both coming at it from two different fronts. Mm-hmm. Phyllis was working out of Mid-America, the St. Louis, Alton, Illinois area. They both ended up moving offices to Washington, D.C., and growing the voice for women who said, listen, I know I can have it all. I just don't have it all at once. That was
Right.
Phyllis Schlafly's famous phrase. She was an attorney. She was a journalist. She an organizer, right? And a lobbyist. She ran for Congress. I'm talking about Phyllis. All of these things, but not at the same time she was raising her kids. At that time, she was also writing phonics books because the school system was moving away from phonics. So she was using all of her time, talent, and energy to not just raise her family according to the godly values she was reading in the scriptures, but to share that with other people so that she could empower other women who wanted to preserve the lifestyle that they believed, and it wasn't a comfortable one. Being a mom is not a comfortable
No, not at all.
a role. It is a lot of work, emotionally, physically, financially, and I want to know, Tracy, then, because you're 25 years in a lawyer's office. Were you a working mom? How did you balance all of this, and what led you to Concern Women for America?
I was definitely a working mother. I think a vast majority of women my age were working mothers. You know, I think I'm seeing that kind of transition now with some of the younger generation wanting to stay at home and raise their children. My son and his daughter-in-law homeschool their kids in a one-income family, and it's a struggle. But it's a decision that has to be made. But yes, I worked. When I graduated from college, went
And you
straight
went to
in-
Liberty, did you not?
I went to Southern Nazarene.
Southern Nazarene. That's right.
Down
I
in
said that.
Oklahoma City, and liberal arts college. But as soon as I graduated, I actually started working for Aetna Health Plans while in college, and just made that transition from college into the corporate America. Never had a thought about wanting it all or needing it all. I just knew I had to work to provide for my family, and there were sacrifices that had to be made. And I think your comment comes back to seasons in life. That season in my life, I had my children, I was raising my children. Once that season passed and they were getting into the high school years, I started thinking about other ways to become involved within the political arena or into the community, into the culture. So we were starting to see a shift. When my kids were in high school, I was oblivious to what was going on in the schools and what was going on in the education system. You know, when your kids are teenagers, they don't tell you anything. And you don't know really what's going on unless you're there and very much involved.
And I'll give you a tip, okay? When my daughter was in high school, I volunteered in the attendance office every Friday because I wanted a weekly update on what was going on in the school. So, but that's time intensive, and it meant I couldn't have a 5-day-a-week job, and I was glad to give it up. I did adjunct work, so I could teach online at home, but I would schedule things so that I had that commitment because, yeah, you have to be a surveillance mom, even if you're not a helicopter mom, to find out what's going on because they don't want to talk to you.
They
And
don't.
that's part of the whole independence. There's
It is.
three I's about adolescence: intimacy, identity, and independence. So part of that independence, it's intimacy with other people outside of the family. Identity of yourself separated from the parents. That's the whole point of adolescence, is that starting to disengage because they're going to move into a phase where they're thinking about their own families, right? So this is all part of a natural process. But because of our culture, it can be a dangerous process if you're not putting the bumper rails on your children as they resist you.
That's right. It's a never-ending job to try to understand what's going on within their hearts and their minds while they're being impacted while they're at school. The school has them for 8 hours, 9 hours a day. I see them in the morning and the evening. And so that precious time you have with them, you really need to be speaking into their lives and to be keeping that communication open to know, what's going on. And hopefully they share with you, as you develop your relationship with your children and your family and so forth. But as they grew older and they got to the point where, of course, they're more independent, and they ended up marrying and so forth, and both of my children are married, and I have grandchildren now, I saw an opportunity to move into a different season of life. And with that, I was looking for an organization. What organization can I find that will couple my faith with my desire to be involved on a civic level? And I looked, and I actually typed in the words, the internet at that time, there wasn't any Google at that time, but there was search engines, Yahoo, your dial-up and all that. Concerned Woman or something of that nature. And up pops Concerned Women for America.
Okay.
And through that, I got in contact with leadership, and they basically said, we have chapters throughout the state that meet and pray over issues going on the federal level, state level, local level. Would you want to lead one of those chapters? And at that time, I thought, no, I don't want to. And I backed away from it and let it simmer for a little while. And it just wasn't working with my schedule at the time. And a few years later, came back to that same organization. I thought, now is the time. I started a chapter, which I still have here in Springfield. We meet once a month, and we pray and we discuss some of the issues that CWA is covering, such as Biden's Title IX, the fall of Roe v. Wade, girls' sports, erasing women. Things that we're seeing going on now is really what we're impacting.
At the national level, but you're also active at the state level.
Right. And so when we saw at the state level in 2023, Senate Bill 39 pass, Save Girls Sports, we were very, I believe, instrumental in influencing leadership at the state level. We have abilities to notify our members and alert our members to things that are going on and encourage them to be involved. So part of my desire to be involved with Concerned Women for America was it allows a woman to use her talents and her passions, I believe, in distinctive ways. So whether you want to be in leadership or you just want to learn, maybe you're someone who doesn't want to get physically involved, as in driving to Jefferson City or things of that nature, or going to your school board meetings, but you're someone who wants to lobby from your laptop.
Mm-hmm.
We support those type of things. I had a woman one time come to one of my meetings. She came one time, and we were sharing information, and she said, I will never come back. And I was concerned because we are nonpartisan. Mm-hmm. It's a policy organization, so we're talking about policy. We're not talking about candidates. I'm not trying to sway them to one way or another. I'm trying to show them.
It's aspects of the culture
Right.
that will influence you.
Right.
Yeah.
And the woman was not interested in coming back because she was more comfortable not knowing what was going on. And that's what I fear often happens within our environment and our culture, especially in Missouri, I think. And I'm going to go out on a limb here because I lived on the East Coast for a while, lived on the West Coast for a short amount of time, came back to home, which has always been Missouri. Missouri, I believe, has always been, back in the day, we'll say isolated, I want to say, from some cultural aspects of
I
things.
think when I moved here,
Yeah.
I was amazed at the cultural difference. I kept learning about Ozark and the Ozark hillbilly history,
Mm-hmm.
which is true. But I also found it to be extraordinarily friendly
Mm-hmm.
and very faith-based. When I started teaching, they said, don't schedule anything for Wednesday evenings. It's off limits. That's when they go to church. And I thought, fine. Well, that all changed.
Mm-hmm.
And from my perspective, the perch I sat from, the universities were instrumental in changing it because they forced the issue. It's like, I'm sorry, you have to choose between your church and when we schedule things. And it became not just anti-intellectual, which was one of the reasons I left, but anti-faith and wanting to encourage a different humanist culture that was bringing in from the outside values that were not part of the culture when I got here. Yeah.
Right.
And it wasn't just the universities. I know for a fact that there were organizations targeting the mayor's office, that the Human Rights Committee for the mayor's office was actually stimulated by outside forces saying, you need to have this. And they started out saying this is about racial equality, but it grew into so much more. And they knew at the beginning that they were going to grow it into so much more. And it really was outsiders coming in to change what we had here. Yeah.
And the outside influences, and I speak to that and some of the information. When I first joined CWA, one of the things they ask of me is, how is your perspective? What is your vision for, Missouri? What are you seeing? And I said, what I'm seeing is, as you said, outside influences coming in and basically taking over or trying to usurp what we as a culture, whether it's the Ozarks, Missouri, however you Midwest, I consider us Midwest, however you want to describe that, these outside influences coming in and basically trying to dissolve the historical,
and that's
faith
the
base.
danger of Washington, D.C.
Yes.
When you can control Washington, D.C., and you nationalize the values that have been made policy there, you've lost your identity as a state and as a local community. And that's exactly the strategy they're using. So on the CWA webpage about you, it says, we're seeing the heartland slowly taken over. We see the influx of ideas and actions that seek to degrade and abolish our values that we hold dear. A biblically minded conservative woman, we must embrace this season to defend and promote the values of Scripture. Just as Esther entered into the palace court, she was a legislator. She helped write legislation. People, if you read the history of God's people in the Bible and read them as persons, you understand that nothing really has changed under the sun, right? Nothing changes. It's just they wore different costumes. The issues are the same. There's a tyranny trying to take over our values as believers in God and his mandate for how God's people live. And there are people used as instruments to provide a resistance to that tyranny. And eventually, through prayer and their action, God's people are free again. But it's an ongoing cycle. You're never once finally free until Jesus comes back, okay? And that's because every generation has to learn this lesson. I truly believe that that's part of the formation of the bride of Christ, that every generation that's going to participate in being that bride has to have character formation, and it's done through this resistance. But that's another episode. But we have to appreciate that Esther was a legislator. She helped with her uncle to write the legislation that modified a very bad law that was going to cause the destruction of her people. Got it? Still going on. The destruction of babies, the destruction of our children in schools. We, as women, have to get engaged in that legislation making and counteract with a resistance to what tyrants would do to enslave us and the next generation. So how does CWA help surround women and men, because you have men in your membership too? How do you surround them and support them with like-minded people?
Well, I see that as a couple different ways. Our organization is national.
Yeah.
So we have a national presence. We have members and chapters throughout the 50 states.
Penny Nance on national news.
She is. You can see her on Newsmax, the Chris Plant Show. I mean, she's everywhere. She's written a book, Feisty and Feminine, which
She's
is a
the
great
one who
book.
went to Liberty.
Yes, she
Yeah,
did go to
okay.
Liberty. And she's on the forefront in D.C. lobbying, and is currently on a bus tour hitting all the battleground states with our She Prays, She Votes pink bus. And so out there working and reminding people to vote, because one of our stances is She Prays, She Votes.
I just heard that on the radio show coming here, a third of evangelicals are not voting. And another third are they're not paying attention to the news and the issues. And I was an election judge last Tuesday. No, not last Tuesday, the Tuesday before. And what was stunning is that in this land of freedom where you're free to vote, and I understand the disappointment in stolen elections and corruption and all that sort of thing, but here's the point. If we all understood that voting is a part of discipleship to influence your culture, that the good candidates have to get through the primary process in order to get to the November elections, we would consider primaries probably more important than November, because the candidates that share our values are unable to get through that process because our conservatives aren't voting. 15% of registered voters in the county where, in the precinct where I was an election judge, 15% voter turnout. That's an indictment, folks. That's an indictment. Because, you know, good candidates can volunteer themselves. Their families can make the sacrifice to support them in campaigns. But if voters don't turn out to elect them in the primary process, they're never going to get to office. And now we're depending on everything to happen in the presidential election in November, which is it's Plan B, because we've already messed up the primary part as far as I'm concerned. The point is that is a very late point in the process to decide to get engaged. Nonetheless, we need you there too. We need you there too. And again, I'm not trying to make this about politics and government as being God. Not at all. But they are instruments God uses, and you have to participate in that in order to protect what God values, like children in life. And one of the things you talk about, the sacrifice that homeschoolers make, is the sacrifice they make is because the tax structure almost requires a two-income family in order to survive. That's utter nonsense. That's a tax structure, which is part of government, which is what we can influence if we were there. And that's, again, that's a Marxist theme in saying women should be in the workplace rather than the home. And it's, I don't think that the anxiety that children experience because parents aren't in the home, they have to be absent from the home when the kids are there. Those latchkey kids, they called them. The unavailability of parents to support their kids in activities they do after school because they have to go to work. Work is not bad, but if work consumes you so that you are no longer in good quality relationship with your children, then it's your culture working against the success of the family. And that's something that we can influence if we understood it and engaged. So you do things like you have meetings.
We have meetings. We have, it really depends on how much a person
have
wants to
email
become involved.
lists
We
for
have email
legislative
lists.
action?
We do. We have an Encourage a Legislator program that a lot of people like to be involved in. A lot of our retirees, maybe our homebound individuals, they love to send postcards and encourage our legislators. And we've heard from legislators over the years tell us how much that they appreciate that and how that impacts them.
Yeah.
In fact, I had a conversation with one of our directors from Georgia last year at our summit in D.C., and she explained that there was a legislator at the state level there in Georgia who was getting cards of encouragement, and he was not a believer. And by the end of session, he was a believer.
Oh, how about
And he said that those encouragement cards were part of what swayed him, because he got them weekly.
Yeah.
And, you can do them weekly, bi-weekly, but he said he would put them in his pocket every day, and when he was on the floor and something wasn't going well, he would pull one of those cards out and just read it. So
Amazing.
just encouraging, can sway a person's heart and can lead them in a different direction. I mean, you have ability to legislate. We have legislative teams that want to go to Jeff City, or we also have a lobbying presence in D.C., where we have women on the ground in D.C., influencing.
Right, you have bus trips to go there and things like that, but it's not required.
Not required. No.
And you do have prayer chapters, like you said, and one of the more, you might say, well-known one is Haven Howard in Branson.
Yes, she's very active. I would have to say the Branson ladies are quite a force to be reckoned with. They are very active. They are very vocal. And Haven's done a wonderful job leading those ladies.
So you are the state director, and you have regional directors as well.
I have Haven Howard, who's the area director. And we're always looking to expand. I'm wanting to get into northern Missouri, Kansas City, St. Louis area. I want to speak to that. You said earlier, talking about people not engaging and being active and so forth. I have a lot of people who reach out thinking they want to engage. But when you start to explain the process, because we do have an application process for leadership that you go through and so forth, oftentimes they take a step back and they'll say, now's probably not the best time for me. But we always keep those doors open, because there's always seasons in life where people might come back later and decide they want to be involved, or someone might want to just go to a chapter.
So many people that don't want to retire because they don't know what they'll do next.
Right.
And I'm like, are you kidding me? I don't have time to work. and I do it to myself. I admit it, but I enjoy it because I meet people like you. And that's what's fascinating, is you meet other like-minded people you would never meet in the workplace.
Right.
So if you are in a point where you're working to entertain yourself rather than you working because you have to, I would offer you another option where you would be doing God's work in a big way to affect our culture and the trajectory of our country. It's a form of service, kind of like being in the army of God, is it right? You're not in the military service where you're going to get a pension, but my mother would say you're going to get a jewel in your crown.
Well, speaking of Army, the CWA has a program we call Deborah's Army.
Ah, yes.
And that's something, my husband is actually a part of Deborah's Army. He donates monthly to that.
Deborah was a military leader.
She was, and she was necessary for the victory. And that's how I see women in today's role.
Me too.
It's when we go back to the very beginning, I always tell my ladies, let's always go back to the beginning. Let's always go back to Genesis and see what it was supposed to look like. And the woman was very much a part of the plan, was very much a part of the family, and always will be, no matter how they try to erase us.
Can I embellish that a little
Yes, go right ahead.
When I get asked sometimes, does it offend you that the Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal? And I say no, because that word men is in Genesis 5, that God created man, male and female, he created them. Man means human. And at the time the Declaration was written, Jefferson and the founders were living in a period of American history that was saturated with the biblical worldview. They didn't have to explain it. People knew what it meant. All right? But now, because of this Marxist agenda to divide women and men, that word suddenly has a non-biblical meaning, and it's ironic, referring to a biologic male, right? And I have to say, listen, have you read Genesis? Do you know? Because woman wasn't even made in the story, whether you believe it's literal or figurative, meaning God has a message for you. I don't know. I wasn't there. The videotape wasn't running. And I'm not going to share my personal perspective on that, but I'm just going to say this: the meaning of the story is the same. Man and woman were made out of that same lump of material. Woman was not made out of a separate lump. Therefore, there is no inferior quality. It's the same stuff. The breath of God was already breathed into Adam. It's the same breath, right? This is two sides of one form that are supposed to work together to create, become basically partners in God's creation in making the next generation. And that has been God's plan all along, that man would be a partner in his creation. And that's what it says. I give you dominion over this earth. So why we think he's going to sit back, well, I guess what's frustrating to me is people say, if God's sovereign, we don't have to worry about it. His will is going to be done anyway. Well, no, read Genesis. He made you to be a partner in his work. And so it's so important to establish right from the get-go what the partnership of men and women was supposed to be, and how that got distorted by an agenda to create antagonism between men and women, and that was Marx. So,
And the antagonism has continued. And and we've seen it, like you said, from the time of Betty Friedan until Beverly LaHaye. And part of that story, Tim LaHaye used to say that when Beverly heard what Betty was saying on that Barbara Walters program, she jumped out of her recliner and said, "You don't speak for me and my friends.
Amen.
I know that my friends don't believe that." And that started the explosion of CWA. They organized a meeting. She expected a handful of women to show up. Hundreds of women showed up.
Yeah.
And it's just grown from there. I think women, we have an ability and we have a gifting to take our country in a different direction. And if we just embrace, as you've said, what the plan was from the very beginning, and we move through that with prayer and with action, which is what we talk about all the time at CWA. We couple those two. They go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
We talk about prayer paves the way, action possesses the land. We see that throughout Scripture. And we see that in some of the policy changes that we've seen happen, because I believe through CWA's advocacy, through the Title IX, we had hundreds of our members made comments when that was opened up. And I believe that had a real impact on policy. We can have an impact on this if we come together and as like-minded individuals support each other.
And we won't get coverage by the mainstream media.
We will not.
Right.
We will not.
So you have to become connected to a grassroots. I call us the underground. You have to get. It's kind of like an alternative world, because the mainstream media is definitely captured by the current narrative, and they continue to spread that narrative, and they want you to believe it. That's called psyops, folks. It's called psychological operations to control what you're thinking. So if you want the freedom for an opposing message to what you're getting on mainstream media, you have to become connected to a group that's doing their homework and willing to share it. So CWA is one of those organizations. So how can people learn more about CWA and the Missouri chapters?
I would direct them to concernedwomen.org on the web. There's an engage button in the top right-hand corner. If you click on that and go down to Concerned Women for America, it will take you to a map of the United States, and you click on Missouri, or if you have friends in other states, click on whichever state you're interested in. It'll take you to the page and give you my contact information as well. You can text me or call me at 417-766-2281. I'm always happy to chat and explain more about CWA and see if it's a good fit for you or maybe a friend or loved one.
Amen. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tracy,
thank
for coming
you.
and joining us. You are a difference maker, and we're grateful for Beverly LaHaye and getting this all off the ground. And so we look forward to seeing you, listeners, more engaged, and just check out the website. It's totally unintimidating, very user-friendly, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by what you see. Until next week when we have Brad Pistow with us and Lynn Morris, I wish you a wonderful, blessed week and a healthy one. We'll see you then.
United we stand in America.